Hello everyone, welcome to StudyIQ. Today the discussion will be on AFSPA or Armed Forces Special Powers Act. I am Vignesh Karthik. So before we start this presentation, I'd like to give you a few points. So whenever we are dealing with topics like this, we need to understand that we should not be swayed by the emotional content that such topics present to us. Generally, the media promotes or comes up with a lot of articles around the emotional factor, though it is important. But from an exam point of view or from a preparation point of view, what is important is the objective element of this particular issue. For example, how do we go about tackling AFSPA is a more important question than what are the atrocities committed by the army, or is the army right in doing so. So when we spend more time on such questions, we will be wasting a lot of time during preparation. So this particular presentation is designed in a way which helps you prepare and write answers better. Let's start with the history. The Armed Forces Special Powers Ordinance. It was first an ordinance which was brought in by the British government to suppress the Quit India movement on 15th August 1942. So Gandhiji started it in the year 1942, and the British wanted to suppress it. So this is a colonial act. So after 1942, the Indian government also enacted this ordinance in 1947 for the states of Bengal, Assam, East Bengal, and United Provinces. So these states were being partitioned at the time of independence, and to ensure law and order, the government had to implement or enforce these ordinances. These ordinances became acts, and in the year 1957, they were all repealed. But after a year, this act was reenacted in Assam and Manipur as Armed Forces Special Powers Act, Assam and Manipur, in the year 1958. The reason behind imposition of such an act was the Naga insurgency, and gradually the scope of this act was extended to all the 7 states of the Northeast, and again primarily because of a lot of tribal insurgencies in that particular region. The act was also extended to Punjab and Chandigarh via the AFSPA Punjab and Chandigarh Act in the year 1983. This was in response to the Khalistan movement in Punjab, and in order to control the situation in that particular region, the act was imposed. And this act was withdrawn in the year 1997. Similarly, the act also was imposed in Jammu and Kashmir in the year 1990. Moving on, the 2 states where AFSPA is visibly existent are Manipur and Jammu and Kashmir. There are quite a few other states where AFSPA has been done away with. For example, there's Tripura, which is done away with the act in the year 2015. The act was brought in Tripura in the year 1997 to control the insurgencies along the line of the Bangladesh border. But now in the year 2015, they've done away with the act. Now, let's get to the technical details of the AFSPA Act. So, one of the important terms used within the AFSPA Act is the term called disturbed area. So, what is a disturbed area? So, a given area is considered to be a disturbed area if the state or the central government designates it to be one on the basis of any dispute, be it on the grounds of language or between regional groups or castes or communities. So, while we go through this definition, it is clear to us that this is a relatively broad way of defining what a disturbed area could be. So, the scope of considering an area to be a disturbed one is relatively wide, thereby accounting for any sort of a dispute. Moving on, let us now discuss as to how an area is declared to be a disturbed area. So, the answer lies in Section 3. The Section 3 of the AFSPA Act empowers the governor of a state or a union territory to give an official notification in the Gazette of India, after which the center sends its army for civilian aid. The word civilian aid is important here because the AFSPA Act is is put in place to make sure the civilian forces or the police get some support from the army. So army does the job of supporting the police in restoring law and order. So in this way, the idea behind AFSPA is a little different from a conventional martial rule or a martial law where army takes over. So AFSPA in that way is slightly different from a martial law, though its implementation is a little different, but the philosophy or the idea behind AFSPA has this difference in it. And moving on, whether the governor prompts the sending of army or the center sends army by itself is still unclear. And the reason for this being unclear is because there have been both instances in the past where the governor asks for central support in terms of sending in the army, or there have also been instances where the center has sent in army on itself. So it's still unclear. Once the area is declared to be a disturbed region, the status quo needs to be maintained for a minimum period of 3 months, and this is being told by the Disturbed Areas Act. So what we need to understand here is that with AFSPA, there is also another act called the DAA Act, the Disturbed Areas Act, which also needs to be enacted. So to repeal the law completely, both DAA and the AFSPA should be repealed. Otherwise, AFSPA is not repealed completely on paper. So I've come across a fun fact. The Punjab government withdrew its DAA in 2008. Though AFSPA was removed in the year 1997, as we discussed earlier, its DAA was removed in 2008. But however, this continued to exist in Chandigarh till September 2012. Remember, Chandigarh is a union territory. So when uh, a party member of Janata Dal United filed a petition in the Punjab and Haryana High Court, the High Court struck the DAA down in the year 2012. And now let's discuss the state government's role in the enactment of AFSPA. The state government, on its part, can suggest whether the act is required to be enforced or not. However, having said that, under the section 3 of the act, their opinion can be overruled by the governor or the center. So, in the recent past, we have seen a lot of news articles around contentions between the central government and the government of Jammu and Kashmir in terms of having AFSPA or not having AFSPA, and also with the government of Manipur, where the governor has a different idea of having AFSPA, and then the local civilian government is trying to do something in terms of making peace with the protesters, etc. The act, however, says that the central government or the governor have the upper hand or the final say. Again, a trivial question: which is the first state to do away with AFSPA? The answer is Punjab and Chandigarh in the year 1997. There could be a doubt or a confusion with respect to another option called Tripura, because Tripura is considered to be one of the first states in the northeast to do away with the act. However, one needs to keep in mind that the act also had been implemented in Punjab in the year 1983, and it was done away with in the year 1997. Another important question concerning the validity of AFSPA is, can AFSPA be in force without DAA? This has been a question raised by the Jammu Kashmir government quite a lot of times, that their DAA or the Disturbed Areas Act had lapsed and still AFSPA continues to exist. However, the government had reasoned out that the state can still be declared disturbed under the Section 3 of AFSPA even without the existence of the DAA Act. Now let's discuss a few provisions. But before we discuss the provisions, please understand that this act is a situational act, and hence, though the core of the act remains similar, the provisions are a little different. So I've just picked up a few provisions that are common, that have been common throughout the AFSPA acts that have been enacted till date. So the first provision is that the armed forces may shoot to kill or destroy a building on mere suspicion. And then the second provision talks about a non-commissioned officer on anybody who may use force based upon his suspicion, either to arrest without a warrant or to kill. And then there is also a provision wherein an officer can fire at anyone carrying anything that may be used as a weapon with due warning as he may consider necessary. And then an important provision is that once AFSPA is implemented, no prosecution shall be instituted except with the previous sanction of the central government in respect of anything done under this act. Thus, it is evident that the armed forces are immune against any prosecution for acts done under AFSPA. So, before we jump to conclusions, uh, on the verbatim or on the words used in the provisions of the act, we need to understand the reason behind enactment of such an act. An act like AFSPA comes to force only when the situation is completely out of control, only when the civilian forces or the police forces lose control and there's a situation of havoc or chaos in a given region. So, in that particular moment, trying to uphold law and order or trying to restore normalcy becomes the prime motive. So, such an act is not wrong in itself, but becomes a wrong act or a draconian act when it is implemented for a prolonged period of time. So, such an act is a quick solution, a quick fix, but not a prolonged or a continual solution for an issue. So, that needs to be understood. So now let's discuss the arguments for and against AFSPA. So there's one primal argument for AFSPA which has been put across. The army is opposed to withdrawal of AFSPA because they think that this will demoralize the armed forces, and also the militants will end up motivating the locals to file lawsuits against the army. So this on one hand takes away the protection against prosecution for their acts under the AFSPA, and B, this will also put them in the trouble of trying to go and prove themselves innocent in the court of law time and again. This will impact the efficiency and effectiveness that the army otherwise has. Moving on, there are quite a few arguments against AFSPA. So the critics first say that this act is undemocratic and has failed to contain terrorism. And in turn, this has increased the violence in the areas that the AFSPA has been implemented. So, going by the famous saying, an eye for an eye makes the entire world blind. So, implementing the AFSPA in disturbed areas makes the areas more prone to violence, is the argument that the critics place. And next, the critics also talk about spiraling violence, which is trying to include or trying to involve a lot of otherwise non-violent groups also into the garb of violence. So, for example, if there is an excess done by the militant or the army on a civilian, and this civilian who was otherwise non-violent now has a reason to join the fight, and this becomes a menace both for the militant and for the army based on which side he joins. On these lines, the former finance minister called AFSPA an obnoxious act. Moving on, Manipur has been hit very badly by AFSPA based on a lot of movements that have come against AFSPA. It is quite evident that uh, the armed forces have been involved in excesses. So, Manipur's human rights activist Irom Sharmila, we also know her as the Iron Lady, has been on an indefinite hunger strike for over 15 years, and she also has been booked under Section 309 of IPC for trying to commit suicide. She's been acquitted in the recent past. However, her fast was for the withdrawal of AFSPA. And another case in point here is the extrajudicial killings or fake encounters. The army has been alleged to have carried out around 1,500 fake encounters between 1979 and 2012 in Manipur. In this light, the Supreme Court said that the army and the paramilitary forces cannot use excessive or retaliatory force in Manipur and asked for a report on alleged fake encounters in the state. Moving on, this is an important trivia. The Justice Jeevan Reddy Committee was set up in the year 2005 to review AFSPA and make recommendations. One of the most important recommendations was that AFSPA should be repealed and the Unlawful Activities Protection Act should be strengthened to fight militancy. So that is a relatively mellowed or toned down act which suits the needs of a civilian crowd. However, no steps have been taken to repeal or reform the act. So until now, we have discussed a lot of technicalities and then general points for and against AFSPA, but this section of the presentation is really important for answer writing. The questions of late have been on lines of proposing what can be done or viable solutions instead of a solution which is not possible in the near future. At this juncture, make sure the answers are based on existing examples. So on that note, let me start with the first point, which is political will. So for political will, Tripura is an amazing example. So the Chief Minister of Tripura, Mr. Manik Sarkar, um, is a CPIM leader, and he's been the Chief Minister of Tripura for quite a while now. And he had been instrumental in using AFSPA in his favor. Basically, he used AFSPA and also had the political will to bring in peace. So, use of security forces and the political will to bring in peace had driven uh, Manik Sarkar's government to ensure that militant insurgency is also contained on one hand, and also people have instilled their faith in democracy on the other. As an evidence to back that, the state had recorded over 84% voter turnout in the 2014 Lok Sabha elections. So this is an important example that people should pick up from. So the idea of meager political gains over violence should be avoided at all costs. Another way to control insurgency is inclusion. So Mizoram is an example here. So the person in the picture is Mr. Lal Denga. He was the head of Mizo National Front. So the central leadership under Rajiv Gandhi had offered a chance to be a part of the government. So he was the first chief minister of Mizoram. On this note, involvement of insurgent leaders in the electoral politics can be an effective way to deal with the insurgency. The idea of giving insurgents a chance should be with an objective of including as many people as possible within the garb of democracy. Next is development. So here in development, I've spoken about political development and economic development. Political development is in terms of Irom Sharmila forming a political party instead of continuing her hunger strike. And according to South Asia Terrorism Portal, the number of civilian deaths in Manipur has shown a continuous decline since 2007, and it was the lowest in 2016, which is a positive signal. And increasing border trade through the More Smart City project and other initiatives to increase trade cannot take place under the perpetual shadow of guns. So this idea that trade and economics can't go hand in hand with guns and violent ideas in itself means that with development, the idea of insurgency or the idea of militancy can be brought down. Next is to understand the importance of coexistence, and this holds more value to Manipur because we have seen that two tribes, Meitei tribe and the Naga tribe, have been trying to impose one on another for a long time now, and that's the bone of contention between the two. The people of Manipur, for starters, need to understand that the land belongs to them as a whole. And then, moving on from there, the political dialogue should revolve around how to work together rather than how to guard one from another. For example, the Nagas expecting an accord on the lines of the Naga Accord wouldn't be entirely uh, a fair deal for the Meitei tribe. And on the same lines, the Meitei tribe expecting a deal which would hamper the interests of the Nagas wouldn't also be the solution. So there should be a stakeholders consultation uh, desk where people from both the tribes or from all the identities existent there come to a table and then discuss, engage in a dialogue, and then come up with a solution. And I've given a few facts about Irom Sharmila's political party. Name of Irom Sharmila's party is the People's Resurgence and Justice Alliance. She launched the party on October 18th, and the significance of this date is that the first session of Manipur Assembly was held on 18th October 1948. This is an important aspect of dealing with the issue, which is army's duty should be distinguished. One needs to understand that the task of army is to combat external aggression and not policing or internal security within the country. And it's high time that both center and the state governments actively work towards strengthening the police forces instead of relying on the army for matters that don't conventionally fall in their scope of work. So the training that an army personnel goes through and the training that a police personnel goes through are completely different. The way that an army person trained is for situations that are completely characterized by a lot of chaos and havoc. So when we install that sort of a person in a civilian situation and expect him to become the police force, it wouldn't really work in our way because of the kind of training and the kind of conditioning that an army personnel goes through. Hence, the armed forces should be respected and should be used for what they have been trained for and what they conventionally have been maintained for. And lastly, civilian government should take up the responsibility. I have taken the example of Jammu and Kashmir in this case because there have been a lot of allegations on the government that army has been made the face of the state and the civilian government is not uh, doing what it should be doing. In fact, the army has taken on economic and developmental roles that have been reserved for governments. For example, laying roads, starting schools, etc. And all these schemes have been devised under the Sadbhavana mission, aimed at winning hearts and minds. And this, in a way, makes army more palatable to the citizens. In terms of army doing the work of government, army in a way becomes the face of the government, which isn't the way to be. In fact, top generals have said that the task of reaching out to people should be done by the politicians. So, be it disaffected sections of the population or be it hostile groups, the politicians should be the ones that are trying to make contact or trying to mend ways. There is no doubt that army should be made accountable for excesses committed and stern action should be taken against them. However, we need to understand that the real solution and the definite solution lies when the civilian forces take charge and relieve army from the task that's been given to them. So this should happen simultaneously. So while the civilian forces are taking charge, the army should be relieved of its duties. And only when this happens simultaneously will there not be a vacuum which another insurgent group will try and fill up. So this needs to be taken care and done very, very cautiously. The idea behind involving civilian forces instead of the army is because we are dealing with a lot of people and multiple needs and wants. These are political questions that need to be discussed by politicians whose solutions also revolve around political processes. A mere blame game will just set us on a downward spiral from which recovery will get harder and harder. Thank you very much. I hope the video has been of help to you. I request you all to like and share the video and also subscribe to our channel. And if there are any questions or comments, please post them in the comment section. Thank you very much.